Imagine you are handed a history book. You're genuinely trying to learn about the origins of a nation, like the absolute bedrock of its culture.
Right, you're expecting the usual dry
Yes,
stuff.
exactly. You open it up completely expecting dates, treaties, maybe trade agreements, or I don't know, the names of generals who fought in some pivotal valley. But instead, you turn to chapter 1 and you find a story about a sun goddess hiding in a pitch black cave.
Which is quite the pivot from a standard textbook.
It really is. And you read on to find out why she's hiding, and the text just casually informs you. It's because her brother, who happens to be the god of storms, just went on a massive destructive bender and dropped a flayed, piebald horse through the roof of her sacred weaving hall.
Yeah, it's a jarring departure from what we modern readers consider a historical record. I mean, it shatters every expectation you might have.
Completely. You look at the story about the flayed horse and the sun goddess, and you instinctively think, okay, I'm reading a fantasy novel, or, a collection of fireside myths.
But the wild thing is, the people who commissioned this specific book, the scholars who meticulously recorded it, they looked at that exact story and declared it to be unquestionable historical fact.
Yeah, this was their legal binding history.
It functioned as the absolute foundational truth for their entire society. It dictated the laws, the social hierarchy, and critically, the divine right to rule.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in the Kojiki. It's widely considered the oldest surviving written record in Japan, completed in the year 712 AD.
And as you just heard, the text is fundamentally a book of myths.
Oh, it is overflowing with them. Creator deities, eight-headed serpents, giant crocodiles, and swords pulled from the tails of monsters.
But beneath the surface of all those fantastical elements lies a remarkably rigid, deliberate structure. It's a text with a profound agenda.
Right, and to uncover that agenda, we have assembled a really fascinating stack of sources for today's exploration. We are drawing extensively on a translated, unabridged audiobook of the Kojiki's first volume.
Which is great because it gives us the raw, direct text, complete with all its ancient, sometimes baffling phrasing.
Yeah, the phrasing is incredible. We're also layering in modern historical analysis as well as a comedic breakdown of the text. That one is incredibly useful for contextualizing just how bizarre and, well, surreal some of these stories appear to a modern audience.
You really need that raw text to appreciate the sheer scale and ambition of the narrative. But you desperately need the historical context to understand the mechanisms at play.
Because without the history, it's just a collection of wild tales.
Exactly. With the history, it becomes a blueprint for empire.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, our mission is to decode the Kojiki. We're going to explore how this text is not just a compilation of folklore that people passed around for entertainment.
Not at all. It is a highly calculated, meticulously structured piece of political propaganda.
It was engineered from the ground up to legitimize the power of the Japanese imperial family by tracing their bloodline directly, and I mean literally back to the gods of the cosmos.
It stands as a masterclass in narrative control and political assimilation.
So as you listen today, I want you to hold a specific thought in your mind. Think about modern leaders, politicians, corporations. Think about the public relations machinery they use to craft origin stories that justify their wealth or their authority.
Sure, we see it all the time.
Right. Now imagine attempting that same level of PR spin, but your core strategy involves looking your populace in the eye and claiming that your great-grandfather was the literal, actual sun in the sky.
It requires a level of audacity that is, quite frankly, hard to comprehend today. But to understand how they pulled it off, we really have to pull back the curtain and look at the real-world boardroom where this history was commissioned.
Because a text of this magnitude doesn't just manifest by accident.
No, it requires a very specific set of pressures. We need to place ourselves in the late 7th and early 8th centuries in Japan. The Japanese imperial court, the Yamato dynasty, was not the undisputed, tranquil center of power we might imagine.
Yeah, they were in a highly transitional, volatile phase, actively trying to solidify their absolute control over the various independent clans and regions of the Japanese archipelago.
Exactly. The Yamato court was surrounded by powerful rival families who had their own histories, their own patron gods, and their own claims to the land.
And the court knew that military dominance wasn't enough to maintain a lasting empire.
Right. You can conquer a neighboring clan with swords, but the next generation might just rise up against you. To secure permanent power, you need ideological dominance.
Yeah.
You need the subjugated people to actually believe that your rule is a fundamental law of the universe.
And there was a major obstacle to that ideological dominance. There were older chronicles and family records floating around held by these different powerful clans.
The Yamato court definitely recognized that these alternative histories were a threat. In fact, the preface of the Kojiki itself addresses this, complaining that these older records were full of, quote, falsehoods.
Which is such a brilliant political euphemism.
Isn't it? Falsehoods simply meant stories that do not place the Yamato clan at the absolute apex of the hierarchy.
Right. So Empress Genmai, who was the ruler at the time, recognized the danger of these competing narratives. She issued an imperial decree demanding the creation of one official, unified history to correct all these perceived errors and set the record straight once and for all.
And to accomplish this monumental task, the court relied on a truly extraordinary figure, a 28-year-old retainer named Hieda no R.
The sources describe him as having a staggering intellectual capacity, essentially a photographic and phonographic memory.
The text literally states he could repeat with his mouth whatever met his eyes and record in his heart whatever struck his ears.
Which is wild. We have to remember that Japan at this time was still heavily reliant on an oral tradition. History wasn't stored in massive libraries, it was stored in the minds of specific retainers.
Yeah, their entire purpose was to memorize genealogies and ancient words. Hieda no R was essentially a walking archive. But Empress Genmai knew that an oral tradition is inherently fragile.
Right. A disease, an assassination, or simply old age could wipe out the official state history. It had to be made permanent.
So the Empress commanded a nobleman and court scholar named Ono Yasumaro to sit down and physically transcribe everything Hieda no R recited.
Which sounds straightforward, but our sources point out this was an absolute logistical nightmare for Yasumaro.
Oh, an utter nightmare. The Japanese writing system, the phonetic scripts we know today like hiragana and katakana, did not fully exist yet. The only writing system available to them was Chinese characters.
So Yasumaro had the agonizing task of figuring out how to capture the specific sounds of ancient Japanese oral storytelling using a foreign writing system designed for a completely different language family.
Right, and he complains about it extensively in the preface. He details his struggle to balance the meaning of the characters with the phonetic sound of the words. It was an incredibly complex translation process.
But he persevered and eventually divided this massive, unprecedented work into 3 distinct volumes. Volume 1, the upper book, operates entirely in the realm of the heavenly gods, detailing the creation of the universe and the grand mythological setup.
Then Volume 2, the middle book, bridges the gap. It transitions into demigods and the legendary early emperors.
And finally, Volume 3, the lower book, grounds itself in the later emperors, where the magic fades, lifespans shorten, and the concerns become intensely human, political, and bureaucratic.
What's fascinating here is that for the 8th century court receiving this manuscript, this was not a collection of allegories. It functioned as a binding legal document.
Yeah, if you examine the first volume closely, the narrative frequently pauses to exhaustively list the lineages of almost every single deity introduced.
Right, and this was not accidental world building. The genealogy of every prominent deity in the myth conveniently terminates with the name of a powerful aristocratic family that was active in the Yamato court in the year 700.
I found that detail absolutely staggering. It operates like an ancient cosmic VIP list. I mean, mixed with the ultimate LinkedIn profile.
Exactly.
If your clan's name is not listed at the end of one of these divine bloodlines, you simply do not matter in the political landscape of 8th century Japan. You have no historical weight, no divine mandate, and therefore no power.
It mapped the current political hierarchy onto the very stars. The message was clear. The Yamato clan is at the top of the social order because they descended from the supreme gods.
Yeah.
Your clan serves the Yamato because your ancestor god was a servant to their ancestor god.
So rebellion against the emperor was framed not just as treason, but as a violation of cosmic law. But that brings up a massive question for me. I look at this text and I have to push back a little against the methodology. If the entire goal was simply to create a legal family tree to say, we are in charge, why go through the trouble of making the stories so incredibly bizarre and visceral? I mean, why include gods throwing excrement or flayed horses or rotting corpses? Why not just write a dry, dignified, boring list of names and clean, heroic deeds?
Well, that is the genius of the Kojiki's construction. You cannot simply invent a brand new religion and a sterile, sanitized history out of thin air and expect a sprawling, diverse population to just accept it.
Right, they wouldn't buy it.
The Yamato court was dealing with real people who already had deeply ingrained beliefs. These bizarre visceral myths were not invented in a vacuum. They were the localized oral traditions, the campfire stories, and the regional folklore that the common people already knew by heart.
Oh, so the Kojiki didn't invent the folklore, it co-opted it.
Exactly. The compilers took the messy, vibrant, sometimes horrific myths of ancient Japan and carefully stitched them together. They took the gods of the rival clans, kept their familiar stories largely intact, but subtly re-engineered the endings.
So that every single narrative thread pointed straight to the emperor's throne.
Yes, it is a masterpiece of assimilation.
They weaponized the local culture. That makes perfect sense. So to prove that the emperors rule the physical world, the book first has to explain how that physical world was built. We have to rewind to the very beginning of the cosmos.
And the text describes a universe that starts out incredibly abstract. The initial state of existence is described as a formless chaos. The text visualizes it as something like floating oil, drifting about aimlessly like a jellyfish.
Out of this drifting, jelly-like chaos, deities begin to spontaneously pop into existence. Most of these early gods are born entirely alone, and the text notes they immediately hide themselves. It feels very distant and untouchable.
It does, but eventually the universe condenses down to a specific male and female pair, Izanagi and Izanami.
Their names translate roughly to the male who invites and the female who invites. They represent the first active principles of creation.
Right. So the older, hidden heavenly gods look down at the drifting, chaotic soup below. They summon Izanagi and Izanami, hand them a heavenly jeweled spear, and give them a very clear directive.
They tell them, go consolidate this drifting land. So the couple stands on the floating bridge of heaven, they plunge the jeweled spear down into the cosmic ocean, and they begin to stir.
And when they lift the spear back up, the brine that drips from the tip coagulates, forming the very first solid ground, the island of Onagoro.
It's a striking, beautiful image of divine architecture, but the moment they descend from the bridge onto that island, the ethereal poetry drops away and the narrative becomes intensely grounded in physical, biological reality.
Oh, very much so. They have solid ground, but an empty island doesn't build a world. They have to actually populate it.
Right, they construct a giant heavenly pillar in a massive hall, and then they engage in a conversation that our comedic source highlights as perhaps the most awkward sex education class in recorded history.
It really reads that way.
Mhm.
Izanagi looks at Izanami and asks, how is your body made?
And she replies with a deeply mechanical assessment of her own anatomy. She states that her body is fully grown, but there is one part that has not grown enough. It is inadequate.
Izanagi responds, that is fascinating, because my body's also grown, but I have one part that has grown too much. It is superfluous.
He literally says, what if I insert my superfluous part into your inadequate part and we procreate the lands?
The translation definitely feels clinical to us, but it underscores a vital mechanism in the myth. They are literally mapping the mechanics of human biology onto the process of planetary geology.
Yeah, the creation of the Earth is not a magical spell here. It is a literal act of physical, sexual reproduction. So they agree to this biological plan, but they realize they need a ritual to formalize it.
They decide to walk around the giant heavenly pillar they just built.
Izanagi will walk one way, Izanami the other, and when they meet on the far side, they will act as if they are discovering each other for the very first time. They commence the ritual, they walk around the pillar, and they meet.
And this is where the crucial mistake happens. Izanami, the woman, is the first to speak. She says, oh, what a beautiful and lovely youth.
Izanagi replies, oh, what a beautiful and lovely virgin. They consummate their union, but the result is an absolute disaster.
They do not give birth to a beautiful new island or a powerful deity. They give birth to something called the leech child, named Haruko.
It is described as a deformed, boneless entity. The parents are so disappointed and horrified that they place this leech child into a boat made of reeds and cast it out to sea, completely abandoning it.
And they try again and give birth to another island, but they realize the process is fundamentally broken. They are not creating order, they are creating anomalies.
So they halt their efforts and return to the heavenly realm to consult the elder gods. They need divine troubleshooting.
Exactly. The elder gods perform a grand divination ritual to find the bug in the system. And the conclusion they reach is incredibly revealing regarding the social engineering of the text.
Right. The gods tell Izanagi and Izanami, the problem is that the woman spoke first. That ruined the process. You must return and do it again, but this time, amend your words.
This is a moment where the political agenda eclipses the mythology completely.
They return to the island, they walk around the pillar again, but this time Izanagi the male speaks first. Says, "Ah, what a fair and lovely maiden." She responds in kind, and suddenly the ritual works flawlessly.
Boom. They begin successfully giving birth to the great islands of Japan there. Awaji, Shikoku, Kyushu, Honshu.
Our comedic source jokes that the unique geographical shape of modern Japan is simply the result of divine incest, but the underlying message is far more severe, isn't it?
It absolutely is. This specific myth was deployed during a time when the Yamato court was actively shifting away from earlier systems of governance, where female chieftains and priestesses held immense political and spiritual power. The Kojiki is using the creation of the world to enforce a strict, uncompromising patriarchal hierarchy. The narrative tells the 8th century reader in no uncertain terms. When women take the lead, when the female initiates action, the result is disaster, deformity, and failure. The cosmic machinery literally breaks down.
But when the man leads, when the patriarchal order is respected, you get order, prosperity, and the beautiful islands of Japan. It is the ultimate ideological weapon, framing gender hierarchy as a literal law of physics.
It's social engineering disguised as a creation myth. It tells any ambitious female clan leader, you cannot challenge the men because the universe will physically reject your authority.
That is a brutal psychological tool. But creating the geography was just phase one. They have the islands, but now they must populate the world with the elements. And this is where the Kojiki plunges into a profound and frankly terrifying exploration of mortality.
Because the creation of the natural world comes at an unimaginable cost. Creating islands was the easy part. The tragedy really begins when the gods try to create the elements.
Izanami begins giving birth to the gods of nature. The deities of the mountains, the trees, the wind, and the plains are brought into existence. But tragedy strikes when she gives birth to the fire god.
She is horrifically burned in the process. The text does not shy away from the brutality at all.
No, it's incredibly graphic. She falls deathly ill, writhing in agony, and even as she is dying, the act of creation continues uncontrollably. Deities of metal and clay are born from her vomit and feces. Deities of water are born from her urine during her agony. And then the mother of creation dies.
It is a shocking narrative pivot. The concept of death is suddenly introduced into the pristine world they just built, and it claims the supreme creator herself.
Izanagi is completely unequipped to handle this. I mean, he's devastated. He weeps so intensely that a crying deity is born directly from his tears. But that grief rapidly metastasizes into absolute rage.
He draws his 10-grasp saber, stands over his newborn son, the fire god who caused the burns, and decapitates him.
The violence just cascades. As the blood spatters from the sword onto the surrounding rocks, dozens of violent deities are spawned, gods of rock splitters, root splitters, fire, and snapping.
The pristine creation is now permanently stained by death and consequence. But Izanagi refuses to accept the permanence of death.
He decides he will simply go and retrieve her. He travels to Yomi, the land of Hades, the dark underworld. He locates the Palace of the Dead, and Izanami comes to the door to meet him. He begs her, "The lands we were making are not finished. You must come back."
Her response introduces one of the most universal mythological taboos.
Yeah.
She tells him that he is too late because she has already eaten the food of the underworld. Across cultures worldwide, consuming the food of the dead binds you to their realm.
Right, Persephone and the pomegranate style.
Exactly. However, she admits she wants to return. She tells him she will go deeper into the palace to consult the gods of the underworld to seek permission to leave. But she gives him one strict condition. Do not look at me while I am gone.
Which is the classic warning that is absolutely guaranteed to be ignored.
Every single time.
He waits outside, but time passes and Izanagi grows impatient. He takes the comb from his hair, snaps off one of the teeth, and lights it on fire to act as a makeshift torch. He steps into the palace and peers into the darkness.
And what he sees is pure, unfiltered nightmare fuel.
Izanami is no longer the beautiful maiden of the heavenly pillar. She is a rotting corpse. She is swarming with maggots. And nesting inside her decaying anatomy are 8 thunder gods.
A fire thunder sits in her breast, an earth thunder in her hand, a rumbling thunder in her foot. It is a stark, horrific confrontation with the visceral reality of physical decay.
The myth forces the listener to look directly at what happens to the body after death, and Izanagi is completely terrified. He screams and flees. But Izanami is deeply humiliated and absolutely furious at being shamed.
She screams, "You have put me to shame," and this initiates what can only be described as the most intense, high-stakes chase sequence in mythology.
It is the ultimate messy divorce playing out across the landscape of the underworld. I mean, the husband refuses to pay child support and just runs.
She unleashes the hags of Hades to sprint after him.
Izanagi is running for his life. In desperation, he takes off his headdress and hurls it to the ground. Magically, it transforms into a bunch of grapes. The ravenous hags stop to devour the grapes, buying him precious seconds.
But they catch up again.
Right, so he snaps his comb, throws the pieces, and they turn into bamboo sprouts. The hags stop to eat the bamboo.
He is shedding the trappings of civilization to distract the forces of death.
When the hags fail, Izanami sends the 8 thunder gods and a massive army of 1,500 warriors of the underworld. Izanagi is sprinting, brandishing his sword behind him to ward them off. He finally reaches the even pass of Hades, the border between the world of the living and the dead.
And growing at the base of this pass is a peach tree.
He rips 3 peaches from the branches and hurls them at the approaching demon army. The supernatural power of the peaches breaks their advance, driving the army back into the dark. Now, I have to ask, why peaches? That seems so random.
It seems absurd, right? Out of all the weapons he could use, why fruit? But it reveals the deep cultural syncretism at play in the Kojiki. In ancient Chinese philosophy and Taoist tradition, which heavily influenced the Yamato court, the peach is a potent symbol of longevity, immortality, and the power to ward off evil spirits.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, by having Izanagi use peaches to defeat death, the text is weaving established continental philosophy directly into the fabric of Japanese myth. Izanagi even pauses to bless the peaches, commanding them to help the people of the earthly realm whenever they face hardship.
That makes perfect sense. He uses an established symbol of life to repel the army of the dead. But the ordeal isn't over. The rotting, furious Izanami arrives at the pass herself.
Izanagi realizes he must sever the connection entirely.
He finds a massive boulder, a 1,000-draft rock, meaning a stone so heavy it would require 1,000 men to move it, and he shoves it directly into the even pass, permanently blocking the exit from the underworld.
They stand on opposite sides of this impenetrable barrier, and they engage in a final, chilling exchange that fundamentally defines the human condition.
Izanami screams from the darkness, "My lovely elder brother, if you do this, I will in one day strangle to death 1,000 of the folks of your land."
And Izanagi, standing in the light, yells back, "My lovely younger sister, if you do that, I will in one day set up 1,500 birthing houses."
What an incredible mathematical curse.
Right. This is where the mythological narrative reveals its practical purpose. This is not just a shouting match. It is an ancient demographic formula.
The people listening to this myth in the 8th century lived in a world where death was a constant companion, right?
Yes. Infant mortality, plague, famine, and warfare took lives constantly. The myth provides a conceptual framework for that suffering.
Yeah.
People die because the mother of creation is actively cursing humanity from the underworld.
It answers the question of why a loving creator would allow death.
Precisely. But more importantly, it provides an answer for why humanity survives despite that curse. If 1,000 people are strangled by death every day, why doesn't the population vanish?
Because the father of creation promised to outpace her destruction, 1,000 die, but 1,500 are born.
Exactly. It is a mathematical guarantee of human survival wrapped in a horror story. It provided immense psychological comfort to an agrarian society.
It's a promise that life will always mathematically defeat death. So Izanagi survives the underworld, but he returns to the surface physically and spiritually contaminated by the pollution of death. He declares, "I have come to a hideous and polluted land." He desperately needs a bath.
And this takes us to the next vital phase, the purification ritual that births the sun, the moon, and the storm. It introduces the concept of misogi, or ritual purification by washing.
Which is still a huge deal today.
It is a cornerstone of Shinto belief that persists to this day. When you visit a Shinto shrine, you wash your hands and mouth before approaching the sacred space to remove impurities. Izanagi's bath is the divine precedent for that action.
So Izanagi travels to a river mouth to cleanse himself. As he strips off his garments, the sheer residual magic of his journey causes gods to manifest from everything he touches. He drops his staff, it becomes a god.
His girdle, his skirt, his trousers, his hat, even the bracelets on his arms transform into deities of the shore and the sea.
He steps into the water, and as he scrubs the filth of the underworld from his skin, gods of evil are born from the dirt. To balance the cosmic scales, gods of rectifying evil are immediately born alongside them.
It demonstrates that his very existence is a catalyst for creation, even when he is merely trying to wash himself.
But the pivotal moment arrives when he washes his face. First, he washes his left eye, and from that left eye is born Amaterasu, the heaven-shining great August sun goddess.
Then he washes his right eye, and Tsukuyomi, the moon god, emerges.
Finally, he washes his nose, and out comes Susanoo, the brave, swift, impetuous male, the god of storms and the sea. I always found it hilarious that this storm god is just sneezed out of his dad's nose.
It is quite an entrance. And Izanagi is overjoyed. He declares, I have begotten child after child, and at the very end I have gotten 3 illustrious children.
These are the big 3 of Japanese mythology, and Izanagi immediately moves to partition the universe among them. He takes off his beautiful jewel necklace, presents it to Amaterasu, and says, "You shall rule the plane of high heaven."
He commands Tsukuyomi to rule the realm of night, and he tasks Susanoo with ruling the sea plane.
But Susanoo, true to his nature as the storm god, outright refuses his divine appointment.
He essentially throws a cataclysmic tantrum.
He refuses to rule. Instead, he sits down and begins to weep. The text describes his crying as so prolonged and intense that his beard grows down to his stomach. His wailing is not just sad, it is environmentally destructive. His tears wither the green mountains and dry up the rivers.
Izanagi approaches his son and demands, Why are you wailing instead of ruling the land I gave you? Susanoo replies, I wail because I wish to go to my deceased mother's land. I want to go to the underworld.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Susanoo is crying for a mother he never even met, considering he was born on a riverbank long after Izanami was sealed in Yomi.
It is a fascinating psychological paradox.
Yep.
Yet he feels this agonizing, destructive longing for the underworld. It is a deep sense of displacement.
And Izanagi has zero patience for this displacement. He is furious that his command is being ignored. He tells Susanoo, if that is the case, you shall not dwell in this land, and banishes him with a divine decree.
The political architecture of this moment is critical. Look at the division of labor and power. Izanagi gives the jewel necklace, the physical symbol of absolute sovereignty, to Amaterasu.
Right.
By placing the sun goddess in charge of heaven, he makes her the supreme authority over the moon and the sea. The Kojiki is meticulously laying the foundation for the emperors. The text will later establish that the Yamato emperors are the direct, unbroken descendants of Amaterasu.
Therefore, if Amaterasu is the undisputed ruler of heaven, her descendants are the undisputed rulers of the earth.
It's exactly. Susanoo's banishment reinforces a harsh lesson. Defying the supreme solar authority leads to chaos and exile.
Defying the sun leads to darkness, which sets the stage for the most famous and certainly the most chaotic sequence in the Kojiki. Before Susanoo leaves for his banishment, he decides he must visit his sister, Amaterasu, in heaven to say goodbye.
And his ascent is so violent and turbulent that all the mountains groan and the earth quakes.
Amaterasu hears the commotion and assumes the absolute worst. She believes her brother is coming to steal her realm. She doesn't just lock the doors, she arms herself for a cosmic war.
She binds her hair into warrior buns, wraps herself in massive 500 jewel necklaces, and slings 2 heavy quivers of arrows across her back.
She grabs her bow and stomps her feet into the heavenly courtyard so fiercely that her legs sink into the earth, kicking away the dirt like rotten snow. She stands her ground and demands to know why he has come.
Susanoo pleads his innocence, claiming he only came to bid farewell before his exile. But Amaterasu demands concrete proof of his pure intentions.
They agree to swear a solemn oath and produce children to verify their sincerity. They stand on opposite banks of the tranquil river of heaven. Susanoo asks for Amaterasu's sword. He snaps the blade into 3 pieces, chews the metal in his mouth, and spits it out.
From the mist of his breath, 3 female deities materialize.
Then Amaterasu asks for Susanoo's jewel necklaces. She crushes the jewels, chews them, and spits them out. From her breath, 5 male deities are born.
It is a bizarre, ritualistic form of immaculate conception through the exchange and destruction of sacred items.
Amaterasu evaluates the results and applies her logic. She says, the girls came from my sword, so they belong to me. The boys came from your jewels, so they are yours.
Susanoo looks at this outcome and declares that because he was able to produce delicate, pure females from her weapon, it proves his heart is pure. He screams, I have gained the victory.
And then, to celebrate proving his innocence, he immediately goes on a massive, rampaging bender of vandalism.
A victory lap of absolute destruction. And it is vital to understand what he is actually destroying. He doesn't just break windows, he attacks the agricultural foundation of the society.
He goes to Amaterasu's sacred rice fields. He smashes down the dividers between the fields and fills in the irrigation ditches. In an agrarian society, destroying the irrigation system is not a prank. It is a direct threat of starvation. It's an attack on life itself.
He then goes to the sacred palace where Amaterasu partakes of the first fruits of the harvest, and he defecates in the hall.
Amaterasu, acting like an enabler for a toxic family member, tries to rationalize his behavior. She says, oh, what looks like excrement must just be something he vomited up because he's overly drunk, and he is breaking the rice field dividers because he feels the land is being used inefficiently.
She is desperate to maintain the peace. But then Susanoo escalates the violence beyond any possible excuse. He violates the weaving hall, the epicenter of divine purity.
Amaterasu is sitting in her sacred weaving hall, overseeing the creation of the garments of the deities. Susanoo climbs onto the roof. He has a heavenly piebald horse, and he flays it backward.
The text emphasizes that skinning an animal backward was a horrific, deeply taboo act of ritual pollution.
He rips a hole in the roof and drops this bloody, flayed carcass directly into the weaving hall. The women inside are thrown into a panic. The terror is so absolute that one of the weavers accidentally stabs herself in the genitals with a weaving shuttle and dies instantly.
The transition from agricultural vandalism to fatal, sacrilegious violence completely breaks Amaterasu.
She realizes she cannot excuse him anymore. Terrified and grieving, the sun goddess flees. She runs to the heavenly rock cave, goes inside, and pulls the massive stone door shut behind her.
And because she is the literal sun, the moment that stone door closes, the entire universe is plunged into pitch blackness.
Eternal night falls across the plain of heaven and the earthly reed plains below. And with the darkness comes immediate chaos. The text states that the voices of evil deities swarmed like buzzing flies, and a myriad of evil portents and disasters arose everywhere.
The universe cannot function without the supreme solar authority. The darkness represents the collapse of order, the terror of a solar eclipse drawn out into a permanent winter. The gods must act, or existence ends.
So the 800 myriad gods gather in the dry, darkened bed of the tranquil river of heaven to brainstorm. It's a desperate cosmic think tank. They call upon the deity of thought inclusion to devise a plan. They realize they cannot force her out. They must trick her into emerging.
They gather birds that sing to herald the dawn, hoping to trick her into thinking the sun is rising.
They mine iron from the heavenly mountains and forge a massive, flawless mirror. They string together hundreds of curved jewels, known as magatama. They even perform complex divination using the shoulder blade of a stag.
They are meticulously assembling the ultimate ritual of enticement.
They hang the mirror and the jewels on the branches of a sacred tree, positioned directly outside the cave door. Then a goddess named Ameno Uzume steps forward to execute the final phase of the plan. She places a wooden tub upside down in front of the cave and begins to dance on it.
She slips into a trance, a divine frenzy. She stomps her feet until the tub resounds like a drum.
In the height of her possession, she pulls down her sash, exposing her breasts, and pushes down her skirt, exposing her genitals. The sight of this wild, uninhibited, naked dance breaks the tension. All 800 myriad gods burst into an uproarious, deafening roar of laughter.
The sheer volume of their joy shakes the entire plane of heaven. It might seem like a crude joke to a modern sensibility, but within the context of the myth, it is a profound disruption.
The world is gripped by the silence of death and darkness, right?
Exactly. Uzume's dance is an explosion of vitality, of reproduction and life, completely shattering the despair.
Amaterasu is huddled inside the dark cave, and she hears this massive, joyful commotion. She is deeply confused. She pushes the stone door open just a fraction and calls out, "I thought the world would be miserable and dark without me. Why is everyone laughing and making merry?"
And Uzume, waiting for this exact moment, replies, "We rejoice because there is a deity out here who is even more illustrious and brilliant than you." They basically bait her pride.
At that precise moment, two gods step forward and thrust the giant forged mirror directly into the crack of the door right in front of Amaterasu's face. Amaterasu has never seen her own reflection.
Right.
She looks into the polished metal, sees a radiant, glowing face, and thinks, it is true, there is a new, beautiful sun goddess. She is absolutely mesmerized. She steps just a few inches further out of the cave to get a better look at this mysterious rival.
And as soon as she shifts her weight outside the door, the hand-strength male deity who had been hiding beside the entrance grabs her arm and hauls her the rest of the way out.
Another god instantly strings a sacred rope across the cave entrance and declares, "You may go no further back inside than this." And just like that, light returns. I love this. So the world was saved by the first recorded striptease, and the gods basically used a TikTok animal mirror trick on the supreme deity.
Sounds absurd when you put it like that, but yes. However, it's impossible to overstate its profound political and religious significance. This myth introduces the three sacred treasures, the imperial regalia of Japan.
The mirror, the jewel, and later the sword.
Exactly. Even today, these exact artifacts or their ceremonial representations are handed down to the Japanese emperor during succession to prove their legitimacy. The myth tells the 8th century reader, the emperor's power is tied to the very light of the sun itself.
The propaganda is flawless, but with the sun restored, there must be a reckoning for the god who caused the crisis. Suzuki was put on trial by the 800 myriad gods. They fine him a massive penalty of 1,000 tables of offerings. They cut off his beard, and in a brutal punishment, they pull out his fingernails and toenails.
Finally, they expel him from the heavenly realm entirely. He is banished to the earthly reed plains. Yet down on earth, this destructive delinquent finds an opportunity to become a legendary hero.
His exile forces him into a new role. Susanoo descends from heaven and lands in a place called Izumo, located in western Japan. He is walking along the bank of the high river when he encounters an old man and an old woman weeping inconsolably over a beautiful young girl.
Susanoo approaches and asks for their identities. The old man introduces himself as an earthly deity and the girl as his daughter, Kushinada Hime.
Susanoo asks the source of their grief, and the old man explains that they originally had 8 daughters, but every year the Yamato no Orochi, an 8-forked serpent, comes and devours one. It has already eaten 7, and the time has come for the last one.
And we are introduced to one of the most iconic monsters in Japanese folklore. The description is monumental. The serpent has one massive body branching into 8 heads and 8 tails. Moss and actual cypress trees grow upon its back.
Its length spans across 8 valleys and 8 hills, and its underbelly is constantly inflamed and dripping with blood. Even ancient divine monsters had a real physical presence.
The Yamato no Orochi is the ultimate embodiment of untamed destructive nature. It likely represents the terrifying flooding of the local river systems, which historically ravaged the agricultural communities of the Izumo region.
So Susanoo looks at the terrified princess, looks at the grieving father, and strikes a bargain. He asks, "If I save your daughter, will you offer her to me to be my wife?" The old man hesitates because he doesn't know his name.
Susanoo puffs out his chest and says, "I am the elder brother of the sun goddess. I've just descended from heaven." Upon hearing his divine pedigree, the old couple immediately agrees.
So his heroism is entirely transactional.
Completely, he demands a prize for his intervention.
Once the deal is struck, Susanoo goes to work. To ensure the princess is safe during the battle, he uses magic to transform her into a multi-toothed comb and securely hides her in the thick bun of his hair. He then turns to the old couple and issues highly specific instructions.
He commands them to brew a massive quantity of 8-fold refined liquor, the strongest, most potent sake they can produce. He tells them to build a sturdy fence around their home, featuring 8 distinct gates.
At each gate, they must construct a raised platform, place a giant vat on each platform, and fill it to the brim with the refined sake.
He recognizes that fighting a monster the size of a mountain range head-on is foolish. He opts for an ambush fueled by alcohol.
The trap is set. The Yamato no Orochi arrives to claim its sacrifice. But as the monster approaches the house, it smells the powerful aroma of the sake. Instead of searching for the girl, the beast diverts to the fence. It dips one of its 8 massive heads into each of the 8 vats and begins to drink voraciously.
It drains the vats completely. The incredibly strong liquor takes effect rapidly. The monster becomes violently intoxicated, collapses, and all 8 heads fall into a deep, drunken stupor.
It's hilarious to think that even ancient divine monsters had a culture of getting drunk and passing out in the street.
Right.
Susanoo draws his 10-grasp saber and launches his attack. He systematically butchers it. He hacks through the heads, the body, and the tails, severing flesh and bone until the waters of the high river turn completely red with the monster's blood. But as he brings his heavy sword down on the middle tail of the beast, he feels a jarring impact. The edge of his divine saber chips.
Which alerts him that something extraordinary is hidden within the flesh. A divine weapon should not chip against bone.
Susanoo pauses, intrigued. He uses the tip of his chipped blade to carefully slice open the flesh of the tail. Resting inside the monster is a magnificent glowing broadsword. Susanoo pulls it out. It is the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword.
He immediately recognizes that this weapon possesses a power far greater than his own. In a moment of profound political and familial submission, he decides to send this miraculous sword up to heaven to present it to Amaterasu as an apology for his past transgressions.
This connects right back to the political mission of the book, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. By finding this sword and surrendering it to the sun goddess, the puzzle of the imperial regalia is complete. The Yamato emperors now possess the divine explanation for their mirror, their jewel and their sword.
Furthermore, Susanoo settling in Izumo sets up a rival earthly kingdom. The text acknowledges that Izumo had immense power, which is historically true, but places it firmly beneath the heavenly lineage of Yamato.
Exactly. The Kojiki absorbs the local legends of Izumo. It acknowledges their greatness by confirming a major god founded their kingdom, but by writing Susanoo as the exiled brother who ultimately submits to Amaterasu, it masterfully places Izumo legally beneath Yamato. It tells the people of Izumo, your founder was great, but he recognized that our founder was supreme.
It is an incredibly elegant way to conquer a rival through storytelling. With Susanoo established on Earth, we jump ahead a few generations to his descendant, Okuninushi, which translates to Master of the Great Land. We get to see how the earthly kingdom flourished before the ultimate political handover.
Okuninushi is portrayed as the ultimate underdog, who earns his sovereignty through immense suffering and trials. He begins his journey as the abused younger sibling.
Right, Okuninushi has 80 brothers, and they are uniformly cruel and arrogant. They treat him like a lowly servant. One day, they decide to travel to a neighboring province to court a famously beautiful princess. They force Okuninushi to carry all their heavy baggage, treating him like a pack mule trailing far behind them.
And as they travel, they encounter a creature that has become one of the most beloved figures in Japanese folklore, the white hare of Inaba.
The 80 arrogant brothers arrive at a cape and find a hare lying on the beach in agonizing pain. It is completely naked. Its skin has been violently torn from its body, and it is weeping. The brothers, acting out of pure malice, decide to torture the creature further.
They tell Hare, if you want to heal, go bathe in the salty seawater and then expose yourself to the blowing wind on a high peak.
Which is just awful. The desperate hare follows their advice, and predictably, the salt and wind dry out the raw flesh, causing excruciating agony. The hare is left writhing on the ground, waiting to die. Sometime later, Okuninushi arrives, exhausted. He sees the suffering hare and feels genuine compassion. He asks, "What happened to you?"
The hare recounts a bizarre tale of hubris. It explains that it was trapped on an island and wanted to cross the sea to the mainland. It devised a trick, challenging the sea crocodiles to a contest to see whose tribe is larger. The hare said, you crocodiles line up across the water, and I will hop across your backs and count you.
A classic trickster narrative.
But the trickster fails to stick the landing.
The crocodiles fall for the ruse and form a living bridge. The hare hops safely across the sea, counting as it goes. But right as it is about to jump onto the safety of the shore, its ego takes over. It pauses and brags, "Ha! I successfully deceived you."
And the last crocodile in the line hears this, snaps its jaws, and rips the skin entirely off the hare's body in retaliation.
Okuninushi listens to the story, recognizes the cruelty of his brother's advice, and offers real medicine. He tells the hare to go wash in fresh water and roll in sedge pollen. The hare obeys, and the pollen acts as a healing balm. Its white fur grows back instantly.
The hare, revealing itself to be a minor deity, repays Okunenushi's kindness with a prophecy. It declares that the 80 brothers will never win the hand of the princess, but Okunenushi will.
The prophecy comes true. The princess rejects the 80 brothers and chooses the kind Okuninushi, but this victory paints a massive target on his back. The furious brothers try to kill Okuninushi. They orchestrate a trap at the foot of a mountain, telling him there is a giant red boar he must catch.
They build a blazing fire around a massive boulder until the stone is glowing red hot. They roll the searing boulder down the slope. Okunenushi, believing it to be the red boar, steps forward and catches it. He is immediately fused to the superheated rock and burns to a horrific death.
But the narrative refuses to let him die. His mother gets the gods to resurrect him. 2 specialized minor goddesses use ground-up clamshells mixed with water to create a paste, which they smear over his burnt corpse, and he's resurrected as a flawless young man.
It is a striking contrast to Izanagi's failed attempt to resurrect Izanami. Here, divine intervention utilizing the restorative resources of the sea actually succeeds.
But the 80 brothers discover he's alive. They kill him again by crushing him in a split tree. He's resurrected again. His mother realizes they won't stop, so Okuninushi escapes to the underworld to seek advice from his ancestor, Susanoo.
And this journey to the underworld is the turning point. Okuninushi shifts from being a victim into a potential ruler attempting to prove his worthiness.
He arrives at Susanoo's palace and immediately falls in love with Susanoo's daughter, Suzarubaim. Susanoo steps out, glares at Okuninushi, and decides to subject this boy to a series of lethal trials.
Susanoo acts as the ultimate gatekeeper of earthly sovereignty. For the first trial, he throws Okuninushi into a room of venomous snakes.
but he's saved by a magical scarf from the daughter. He waves it 3 times, and the snakes are subdued.
The following night, Susanoo places him in a room swarming with venomous centipedes and wasps. Again, he's saved by another magical scarf.
Realizing the indoor trials are failing, Susanoo takes him out into a massive dry moor. Susanoo shoots an arrow into the brush, tells Okuninushi to get it, and then sets the grass on fire. Okuninushi is trapped in a ring of fire.
But just as he is about to be incinerated, a small mouse emerges from the ground, tells him about a hollow hole, and Okuninushi hides in it while the fire burns over him. The mouse even brings him the arrow.
That detail is paramount. The natural world itself is actively conspiring to save Okuninushi.
It proves to the audience that the land recognizes him as its rightful master.
Susanoo is finally impressed. He commands Okuninushi to pick the lice from his hair, which turn out to be giant centipedes. Okuninushi uses red berries and red earth to trick Susanoo into thinking he's chewing up the centipedes. Susanoo relaxes and falls asleep.
Which sets the stage for one of the greatest escapes in mythological history.
While Susanoo sleeps, Okuninushi ties Susanoo's long hair to the rafters of the palace roof. He places a boulder to block the door, steals his daughter, his life-preserving sword, and his bow, and escapes. But as he runs, a stolen magical lute brushes against a tree and wakes Susanoo up.
Susanoo jolts awake, but because his hair is securely tied to the roof, his sudden movement literally pulls the entire palace down around his ears.
By the time Susanoo untangles his hair, Okuninushi is sprinting into the distance. But instead of cursing him, Susanoo yells out a booming blessing, telling him to use the weapons to defeat his brothers and rule the land.
It is an incredibly fond, almost proud farewell. He is acknowledging that Okuninushi successfully outsmarted him.
Now, I have to push back here. Why is the book spending so much time making Okuninushi look like this ultimate badass hero, overcoming death, taming monsters, and winning the girl, if he's not in the imperial family line? Does that not undermine their own claim?
It seems highly counterintuitive, but it is actually the apex of political storytelling. The scholars compiling the Kojiki understood that their audience already knew and revered the legends of Izumo. If they portrayed Okuninushi as weak, the narrative would be rejected. By writing Okuninushi as a powerful, legitimate hero who overcomes great trials, the Kojiki makes the Yamato conquest of Izumo look even more impressive. It's the ancient version of game respects game. You don't brag about conquering a weak enemy, you brag about conquering a strong one.
That reframes the entire narrative. They are building him up just so his eventual surrender carries more weight. And that handover is exactly what happens next. Okuninushi has built a great earthly kingdom. But up in heaven, Amaterasu looks down and says, "My descendants should rule that."
Thus begins the great political negotiation. Heaven decides to send messengers down to demand the earth, but the first several attempts are catastrophic failures.
One messenger stays for 3 years and sends no report. Another, the heavenly young prince, takes 8 years and eventually shoots a sacred pheasant with an arrow. The gods thrust the arrow back down, killing him.
That originates the proverb of a returning arrow. It serves as a stark moral warning against defying heavenly authority.
Recognizing diplomacy is failing, the gods send Takamikazuchi, a fearsome martial deity. He descends to Izumo, plunges his sword into the crest of a wave, and sits cross-legged directly on the razor-sharp point of the blade.
A phenomenal display of martial intimidation.
From this terrifying position, he demands surrender. Okuninushi's sons try to resist. One gets his hand crushed like a reed, the other runs away in terror. Finally, Okuninushi agrees to abdicate the earth, but demands a massive concession.
He demands they build him a temple, with pillars reaching the nethermost rock and crossbeams reaching heaven.
This explains the origin of the clan shrine of Izumo, Izumo Taisha.
This story codifies a political treaty into religious architecture. The Yamato clan conquers Izumo, but agrees to forever honor and appease the displaced gods by building them an unparalleled shrine.
With the earth secured, Amaterasu's grandson, Ninigi, is sent down to rule. He brings the 3 sacred treasures and descends to the peak of Takachiho in Kyushu. But almost immediately, he makes a choice that alters his descendants forever.
He encounters a beautiful woman named Princess blossoming brilliantly, like the flowers of the trees. He asks to marry her.
Her father, the mountain god, offers her and her older sister, Princess Long, as the rocks. But the older sister is extremely ugly. Ninigi is horrified and sends the ugly sister back, marrying only the beautiful one in a one-night stand.
The father is furious, he explains. I sent the rock princess so the emperor's life would be eternal and unshakable. I sent the flower princess so his life would flourish. Because you rejected the rock and chose only the flower, The lives of the heavenly sovereigns will be sleeting like falling blossoms.
So what does this all mean? From a propaganda perspective, it is a brilliant PR spin. The writers needed to explain why the emperors, who supposedly have literal divine DNA, still die of old age and sickness like regular people.
The answer? Because our ancestor was superficial and chose the hot sister.
Exactly.
It's a flawless narrative bridge. It transitions the story from the immortal, magical realm of gods into the mortal, fragile realm of human history.
Ninigi's descendants must now bridge the gap to the first official human emperor, Jimmu. This involved one last magical detour to the bottom of the sea. Ninigi has two sons, Fireshine, a fisherman, and Fire Subside, a hunter.
They swap tools for a day. Fire Subside loses the fishhook in the ocean. Fireshine refuses all compensation, demanding the original hook.
The younger brother goes to the sea god's palace. He climbs a cassia tree over a well. The sea god's daughter, luxuriant jewel princess, sees his reflection. He spits a jewel into their water vessel to demand attention.
He marries the princess and stays for 3 years. Finally, he sighs, remembers the hook, and the sea god finds it in the throat of a sea bream.
But the sea god doesn't just return the hook. He gives Fire Subside magical tide-controlling jewels. Fire Subside returns to land and forces his brother into submission using the tides.
His sea princess wife comes to land, pregnant. She builds a birthing hut of cormorant feathers. She gives him the classic mythological warning, "Don't look at me while I give birth. I will revert to my native shape."
But he peaks, and she is writhing around as a giant 8-fathom crocodile. Ashamed and enraged that he looked, she abandons the child and seals the border between the sea and the land forever.
The severing of the sea path represents the final physical link being broken between the human world and the magical realms. The gods are retreating.
That abandoned child grows up, has a child, and that child is Emperor Jimmu, who the Kojiki claims founded Japan in 660 BC. But before we move on, I have to bring in a wild detail from the comedic source about Jimmu's parents.
Oh, the red arrow.
Yes. The father turned into a red arrow, floated down a stream, and shot into the mother's privates while she was using the restroom. She pulled the arrow out, it turned into a handsome man, and they got married. This is how the source describes the folklore, highlighting the absolute bizarre nature of these divine lineages before history normalizes.
And from Volume 2 onwards, the Kojiki shifts dramatically, the magic dials down, and we get stories of military conquest, like Yamato Takeru, the warrior prince who subdues rebellious tribes. The book morphs from cosmogony into a charter of conquest. The gods are now just the Yamato army forcing the rest of Japan into submission.
Let's summarize this incredible journey. We started in a chaotic cosmic soup, watched gods invent death, saw the sun hide in a cave, watched a storm god slay an 8-headed serpent, and saw a divine prince choose beauty over immortality.
All culminating in a family tree that hands the keys of Japan to the 8th century imperial court.
So, to you listening, think about the sources you consume today. How often is a completely factual-sounding history actually carefully curated propaganda? The Kojiki just did it with more style, incorporating giant crocodiles and magical swords.
Which leaves you with one final thought to mull over. If the Kojiki was a successful attempt to write a nation's ancient history using the folklore of its time, what current cultural myths, urban legends, or internet lore are being written right now that someone 1,300 years in the future might dig up and assume was our absolute, unshakable truth?
That is a wild thought. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the source material.